Welcome, everyone. This is the Weave Teams for Enterprises overview. And the simple question that you might have is, hey, what's this new item in the Weave dashboard that is coming before the end of the month? Well, that's what I'm going to present to you. I'm very excited about this. The team has been working really hard, and we've got some really exciting things to share. Let's go ahead and get started on this. Our motivation is always that we believe collaborating teams are the world's best hope for solving the problems we face. We believe that for both business and for societal problems. And we are grounded in the belief that the right frameworks dramatically improve collaboration outcomes. Now, some people call frameworks serious games. I've called them serious games in the past. Some people call them practices. But the higher level purpose of this conversation is to say, look, if you've got a team and they're facing a challenge, the right framework can help them be dramatically better. Now, I've been talking a lot about teams, so let's think about teams. Agile organizations have always been built on teams, and we continue to explore new forms of dynamic structure. 20 years ago, in my book, Journey of the Software Professional, I talk about organizations that I saw emerging that I called clusters, which were dynamically structured teams that had different communication paths. And then I talked about matrix organizations, not in the traditional way, but looking at building the right thing the right way. Several years ago, I ended up being invited by Heinrich Nieberg when he was at CRISP to talk about some of the work that he was doing. And Heinrich has since expanded this to distributed agile teams in the Spotify model for agile. Now, many people know this model, and I'm not claiming that it's the only model, but I think it has many qualities that are quite strong, where we have tribes and squads that are focused on building shippable products with chapters that enable cross-functional collaboration and guilds that allow knowledge sharing. Now, there's still additional very interesting work being done in teams. We've got Dave Gray, who's a dear friend, who wrote the Game Storming book, but he also wrote The Connected Company, and he talks about podular organizations. And those circles are reminiscent and related to sociocracy, which is also exploring some very different and very interesting ways to look at human social organization. And finally, we've got Jürgen Appello, who's doing some interesting work with a technique called Management 3.0. So there's a lot of teams, and there's a lot of power in teams. And we use teams as the unit of work in most of the agile methods that I know. And we always have, the Jeff Bezos 2 pizza rules, right? We want a team that can be fed by 2 pizzas. Now, the problem is that the current Weave platform doesn't support teams. So let's say you want to produce a speedboat retrospective for 5 teams. And this is just one of the more than 150 frameworks that are available out of the, when you start with Weave. And, we've got all these great powers, right? We can schedule them. We can get more information about them. We can learn about them through integrated courseware. But it's hard, right? You can't use a Gala because Weave doesn't know about team structure. So what you do as a facilitator or a producer is you use multiple forums, which means you individually schedule each forum, you edit the guest list for each forum, you send out the unique URL or join ID for each forum to the team, and what you end up feeling with is just, basically it's ugh. And you can ask people like Laura and I, we've done enterprise retrospectives for 40, 50, 80 teams. And after a while, scheduling 80 forums gets a little old. Last week, I was in Munich working with the top 80 architects of a client, and Dan and Robert were there helping me. And after scheduling more than 100 forums, you start to realize, wow, teams are needed in Weave. So let's look at some of the design criteria for a team in terms of what we've seen over the years that we've been practicing Agile. One is you start with just enterprises are comprised of individuals. Well, that's a good starting point. And then let's look at enterprises. Well, there's natural organizations within an enterprise. We have business units organized around markets. We have functional units like sales or customer service or customer care or field support that are organized around roles. And of course, you have product teams organized around specific products. Now, we also have this natural structure of a team We have teams within an organization, like a Scrum team as part of a larger product team, or we have teams across one or more organizations, like a Spotify guild. And we finally have this notion of the individual, circling back to the topic at the top, or the bullet point at the top, that an individual may be associated within 0 or more organizations or teams. So let's say, for example, I'm a user interface designer. I might be in a Scrum product team or even 2 Scrum product teams, but I might also be a member of the guild or the tribe of designers. And from the clients that I work with who are adopting Scrum or variations of Scrum, I often ask them to form a tribe of just the Scrum Masters. And by working with just Scrum Masters, we can find ways for improving the enterprise. Now, we also have to preserve Weave enterprise awesomeness. For those of you who are already enterprise customers, there are certain qualities that we don't want to lose. And one of the most important ones is enterprises need to be able to collaborate with people who are not part of the team or the enterprise. A simple example would be market research. A more sophisticated example would be enterprises who have 3 or 4 partners working together, building out a complex product or service. Teams should be trusted to structure themselves. We do believe that there's a role for an organization, an enterprise, to structure their organizations, but within an organization, we don't want to have a lot of complexity. Sometimes I think about this as the difference between LDAP and authentication directories managed by businesses versus the natural ad hoc structure of the modern enterprise. So we really want to have this notion that teams can be trusted to structure themselves. We have a concept of a forum and a gala. A forum is a single use of the platform with a defined group of people, and a gala is a dispatching mechanism to enable scale. So we control entry into forums and galas very carefully through guest lists, and we have scheduling based on individuals. So we want to keep the guest list capabilities, and we want to enable scheduling based on organizations and teams. Finally, we are expecting Weave to continue to grow rapidly. We've got some clients who are moving into well over 1,000 and 2,000 facilitators and weavers. So we had to make sure that we design this for scale, which means things like paginating the queries and providing immediate search as opposed to things that would require you to have long page load times or long interaction times. Now, let's give an example of how we might take some of the concepts that I just said, things like organizations and teams, and map them to the Spotify team model, which I know a lot of agile organizations are adopting. The whole collection of people would be an account or an enterprise within the Weave platform. Tribes represent organizations, and squads are teams. Now, there's a notion of sponsorship. And that's an important word in our platform because sponsorship kind of gives you the home of the team. And we would know that these squads, which would be named, are teams within a particular tribe. Chapters are, of course, also teams. And because a chapter is located within a given organization, they're sponsored by the organization. Guilds are a little different. Guilds, by definition, in the Spotify model, cross across organizations. So they could be sponsored by the account, or they could be sponsored by an organization. So, for example, going back to the work that I did with Dan and Robert in Munich a couple of weeks ago, our client was organizing an API ecosystem conference, and it was one organization that was inviting other organizations into the event. So in that case, the guild, which were the architects who were joining us, were sponsored by a particular organization. So we need this kind of flexibility to really understand how we can manage our organizations. And Weave is now designed to support all of this. So let's look at a few key concepts of how we took that conceptual model and we implemented that in Weave. The first is we have to understand who is an administrator or who is an admin. Now, we have a starting condition of Weave system admins. Those are people like Dan and Luke and Laura. And our responsibility is primarily to provision licenses for enterprises and make sure that the enterprise license terms and conditions are accurately represented from the sales process into the system. Then we have enterprise admins. Well, these are people who manage an account. Now, if you're using the single sign-on feature of Weave, you don't have to worry about managing your users. But without single sign-on, people at the enterprise level, they manage their users, like deactivating people who've left the company and making sure the data is managed when they leave the company in an appropriate way. The enterprise admins also create organizations and establish organizational administrators, and they analyze usage via enterprise reports. And we'll come back to that later in the talk today. An org admin is people who help manage the membership of the org, and we allow more than one to help organizations scale. As a side point, we also allow more than one enterprise admin, and that's also a mechanism of scale. But lastly, we're going to talk about teams. Teams do not have admins. We let them self-govern. And we think that that's striking the right balance based on the work that we've done with corporations to let them have the right amount of structure with the right amount of flexibility. Now let's look at how organizations are expressed in Weave. And I'm going to do a demo in a minute, but before we get to the demo, I wanted to just give you a chance to look at the screens without having me click and move them around. When you see your enterprise account, and this is the Conteneo enterprise account, you can see that you can create organizations. And so there's a new menu item that you can see over here, orgs. And orgs enable you to create different kinds of organizations. And this goes back into the business units, functional units, and product teams. Now, organizations have a set of members. And so here we can see that corporate is Dan, Laura, Luke, and Joe corporate. By the way, as an aside point, when you see Yap Mail in either my slides or today's demo, Yap Mail is a disposable email service that you can use for testing. And so when you see Yap Mail, don't worry about it. We're just using it as part of our testing process. Now, users and teams in Weave. This goes back to this menu item that I talked about right here, which is this new menu item. When you click on users and teams in Weave for Enterprise, you'll see that there's the organization, starting with the account, and then all of the organizations underneath the account, like corporate and the other ones. If you select an organization, you'll see the users or members of that organization. So here, when I select account, I see all the users in the system. When I select a given organization, down here at the bottom, I see its members. And then I can see the teams. Now, notice that when I selected the account here, there's no teams. We'll create one in the demo. And when I selected the organization of corporate, I had a sub-team within that organization, sales, which is Luke and Laura, which is Conteneo's sales team. Now, when we move into scheduling, and I'll demonstrate scheduling, scheduling got a rewrite from scratch. We changed forms and galas to be much more explicit. And when you click one of those, you'll see a new tabbed interface where we're going to break apart the event settings from the people and access. Now, the event settings is still the same. It just gives us a name and a time and a place and a duration for the forum. It's where the real interesting things that have changed is when we start looking at people and access. You can add individual people. It's paginated queries with very, very fast searching capabilities. You can look at the sales, the names of the organizations or individual people. And we also have a very detailed user interface that I'll demo that I really, really like the way the team identified this, because they've made people, the team, and the organization first-class objects so you can really manipulate the system to get the information that you want. Finally, we redesigned the notion of the authentication. In the current Weave platform, this is called security, and that was a little confusing. So we worked with a couple of our customers to try and find better language for the verification of participants and reviewers. We still have the same options of unverified, verified, and anonymous participation. We just have better language here. Let's get to the demo. So I want to point out that on the internet, we're looking at Weave Preview. So the production system that you're used to using is Weave, but when you're using the preview system, it's a copy of the production data. So if you want, after this webinar, to try out the preview before the bits go live, just go to weave-preview.conteneo.co, log in with your current credentials, and you'll be able to interact with the system. There's a couple of things that I would warn you. Don't do any work that you want to preserve, because Weave is periodically refreshed. And there's one thing I want to reassure you with is, because Weave has a copy of production data, it is maintained in the same degree of security that the production system is maintained. So Weave Preview contains a copy of production data. It is secured as if it were production data, but it is not backed up and not managed. It's a place for you to try things out. Now, the first thing that you're going to do if you're an enterprise admin is you're going to go to your enterprise account, and this is your settings, and you're going to look at orgs. I had created one org. If I wanted to create an additional org, let's say I wanted to create an org for my dev org. I go ahead and I create my dev org, and now I can go ahead and start to really add people and search. So I can see all of the different members of my organization, and I've got Dan, I've got Kyle, I like to be part of the dev org even though I'm not actively developing anymore. I like to kind of know what's going on. I've got Robert. So that's my org team for my devs. So this is how we manage organizations. And I can even go ahead and I can do things like I can say, grant Dan administrative rights to this organization, which means when Dan logs in, he'll be able to further add new members to the organization or further structure the organization as he's working. Now, once I've got my organization, I can go back into my normal Weave dashboard, which includes my currently running forums, the forums I've got scheduled, and the forums that I've completed. And once I get into the frameworks, and for those of you who are new to Weave, there's more than 150 public frameworks that are created in Weave, ranging from retrospectives to business canvases to planning and impact effort matrix. So let's say I wanted to work with my corporate team on that would be a good one, probably an engineering impact effort matrix. This is one of my favorites in Weave in terms of looking at business items, looking at engineering items, and doing an effort and a size comparison, or a priority and effort and size. So now we can start to see the differences in using organizations and teams when I schedule. When I'm scheduling, I can pick a forum or a gala. If I pick forum, this is the normal part, but now in my scheduling and access for adding people, I can start to say I want to really add all of my devs, and I really want to add all of my corporation people. And so I can look at organizations or teams. I still have the same degree of access. So down here, you can see that I've got two icons, a person and a magnifying glass. The person means that they're a participant. The magnifying glass means that they can see only the results. So in this form, I might say, well, I want my corporation to see the results, but I want my organization, my dev org, to be the people who are participating. Now, understanding the larger structure of users and teams, I click on the users and teams item, and I can see that I've got my account, which is all of the members in the account. I can also click on corporate, and I can see that I've got one team in corporate, and then I can see I also have a dev org team, but I don't have any teams here. So maybe what I want to do is I want to create a sub-team of the people who are the full stack developers. So I could say full stack devs. And in my full stack devs, I know I've got Dan and Robert as my full stack members. Now notice if I want to create another team, which is like, I might have my GUI designers, right? Or my front end developers. I could say Kyle is my front end developer, but I can also create people from other parts of the account. So let's say that Laura suddenly magically moved from sales to become a front end developer. I could add her as a team member, so you can see that Laura is a member of the dev org team, even though she's not a member of the dev organization. This would be equivalent to the Spotify notion of a guild, which is a group of people who share a related interest but are crossing organizational boundaries. That's the core structure of teams in the enterprise and organizations in the enterprise. There is a lot of subtlety that the dev team added to this style of working, which I'm really proud of. For example, you can notice that where it says front-end devs, you can see in the organization, if I go back to my account, I can start to see all of the teams in the account, and I can see that the front-end devs are sponsored by the dev org, whereas the sales team is sponsored by the corporation. If I added a team here, which would be maybe my I don't know, my people who like chocolate, and that is a team of people who just love chocolate in the organization. I know Ari, and I know John and Kyle and Laura, and of course Mike Northcott and myself. We all love chocolate. I could add the team who loves chocolate, and notice that instead of being sponsored by an organization, this team is sponsored by the account. Now, what this gives us, it gives us the opportunity to continue to enhance Weave so that we're managing teams and making it easier to manipulate teams, both as a first-class object and as a capability for promoting further collaboration. At this point, I'm just going to say thank you for participating.